Okay, so imagine this. You've got alarms, antivirus, firewalls, backups, insurance. You spent a fortune on security, and yet you're still wide open. Welcome to Cybersecurity Poverty Line, where it's not just about how much money you're spending, but how wisely. Now, I'm your host, Scott Kreisberg, and in today's episode of One Step Beyond Cyber, we're breaking down a reality that's far too common with businesses. Now, we're going to get into things like limited resources, complicated tools, big risks with no clear roadmap. So, we're not just asking, are you protected? We're asking, are you prioritizing the right things? Because the truth is, throwing money at cybersecurity won't save you if your people aren't trained, if your processes are broken, and your strategy is reactive instead of resilient. All right, well, let's welcome back our very own CISSP, Tim Derrickson. Great to see you today. How's it going?
It is going wonderfully. How is everything going in your world?
Well, we're in the cybersecurity business, so it's always fun. All right, well, let's dive in. So I'm going to just start off maybe providing a little bit of background on what we're talking about, and then we'll dive into it. So this concept of this cybersecurity poverty line, right? Where did it come from, and and where, how's it being used today? So it got started by a lady by the name of Wendy Nather, and at the time she was a Cisco CISO, and this is back in 2011, and she coined this concept to identify, let's say, organizations that were struggling with security and not having sufficient budgets, expertise, capabilities, or even influence within their organizations. And it might include businesses that are considered, that are startups or schools, pretty much any sort of small and medium-sized enterprise that didn't have adequate resources dedicated to security. And so the analogy obviously comes from an economic concept, right? Where you have people that are below, let's say, an economic poverty line as compared to a cybersecurity poverty line. And she thought that would be a good correlation to help have people really understand what she's trying to explain here. And so why does this even matter, right? And so the concept, when it was originated in 2011, it has only gotten to be even more relevant because the number of businesses that are finding themselves below the cybersecurity poverty line is growing year over year. And so in 2013, she decided to update it a little bit. Instead of having this sort of scolding concept where, you're below the cybersecurity poverty line, how dare you? She decided to change it up to being more about practical survival strategies. And so, I think that improvement has helped. So businesses are like, well, I can't do that. That's too big of a jump. So with that sort of concept, Tim, let me ask you this. So when we say cybersecurity poverty line, like I said earlier, there's this common viewpoint out there that we're strictly talking about money. But is there something else deeper here?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is I love that she brought in the financial aspect of it because prices have dropped actually when we start talking about some of these tool sets from 2011 to today, but so has the threat landscape. But we're also talking the tool sets themselves, right? I mean, you can spend all the money you want in the world and still miss. You can buy the latest and greatest and only buy that upper tier without doing your patch management, without making sure you have a MDR or EDR, managed detection response, or an endpoint detection response in place, which causes small holes or small doorways into your environment that you don't even realize you have.
Exactly. Yeah. There's, and I think it's an old adage, but it's like, it's not always about how much you spend on something, right? So
No.
I'm sure we've experienced, where we were told to buy this thing, it was inordinately more money, and it turns out it wasn't any better than something priced, maybe significantly less.
Yeah, attack vectors change in the fact of way technology is used, but the attacks themselves are all still done the same way. It's all bits and bytes, right? Nothing's really
Right.
changed on the bits and bytes level of everything. But with AI, things are coming faster. Um, According to 2025 from Checkpoint, the ransomware landscape is now changing again. The big actors are disappearing, and now we have one called. They actually have a cartel ransomware group now. It's an actual cartel, and that's what they named themselves. So everything's changing in that aspect. So when these people are sitting behind the poverty line, they don't have the tools in place. They don't have the talent in place. They don't have the money to spend to put all this in place, which would still be that poverty line. It makes it a lot harder when things like this happen. We're able to shift and make sure that we're following along with what's going on within our corporation, because that's
Mm,
what you pay me to do, to make sure we stay on top of this.
right.
It's a lot. It's a job in and of itself, and I think that when we start talking about talent on that cybersecurity poverty line, it's really important to make sure you have somebody, even if it's not someone in your corporation, looking after your environment.
Absolutely, yeah. And for me, when we're talking about the cybersecurity poverty line, I like to also, bring in another analogy, because people have this concept of like cybersecurity and data is this like ambivalent concept. And so I always like to try to make it real by having them align their digital space along with their physical space, right? And we all understand with our physical space, like our house, we put alarms on them, we put these automated door locks on them, we make them smart homes, and we put cameras all over them. We have insurance, we have home warranties. We're doing all this stuff around our physical space, but people need to understand their digital space today um, is just as important, and you need to view that space as something that you want to protect.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about it, right now, what people are doing is they're actually starting to protect their digital identities in the same way that what you're talking about of protecting your home, protecting what we're doing right now, right? We're on a podcast, our voices are out there, our faces, our expressions, that can be copied. And so we're making sure that there are protections in place so that that doesn't happen. But there's also now businesses spinning up that protect your digital identities. So it's the same thing. And then once again, like you're saying, though, we'll do it for our digital identity, realizing that they can steal from, whether from social media to try and get into our financial institutions. But when it comes to the business, we forget to protect our digital assets and how important those digital assets are internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good points. So let me ask you this: how would you suspect a small business owner, small to even business, a medium-sized business owner might feel if they're operating below that cybersecurity poverty line?
I think what's interesting is what we're seeing too when it comes to these businesses that are operating below. Most of the time that they contact our corporation for what we do, right? They're calling because there's a business email compromise. They're calling because there's some type of
Yeah.
incident inside their environment that's happened and they don't know how to deal with it. So what I'm seeing from everything that we do is that these businesses have, we're talking barely antivirus in their environment. And even if they have it in there, they're expecting that antivirus to take care of everything for them. And they're putting it in and they expect it to work. And we've talked about this many times. You can't just let it sit there. You have to go out and investigate, see what's going on, and make sure that there are no really big alerts happening in the environment. We can't just set and forget anymore. And I think that's probably where a lot of people below that poverty line are sitting. I think the ones that are sitting at that poverty line have sort of learned their lessons, but they're still unsure of where they're supposed to go. So now this is where they go out and they buy all the tools and they get to that poverty line so that they know that at least they have tools in place, right? That's going to protect me. I put a firewall in place, but I forget to set all the rules for it. I put in my EDR or my endpoint detection or my managed detection, but I don't know what I'm protecting against. So I don't know what alerts to look for.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny because I'm thinking about like the DIYers, right? The do-it-yourselfers and they go to Home Depot or their favorite local, hardware store and they buy tools, right? But they don't necessarily know how to use those tools exactly right. And then they can mess things up even more, right? You're paying the professional, not only because they have the right tools, but because they have the know-how, right?
But a hammer can be used as a screwdriver.
Sure. Absolutely. I kind of view this thing a little different because I come from that, that business entrepreneur owner perspective. And I kind of go, God, if I was living below that line, Tim, I would be like very nervous because you can't turn on your computer or go to social media or whatever. If you even use the old fashioned TV, all the headlines are about cybersecurity breaches. And so for me, I would think that, as a SMB that isn't necessarily educated on it, I'd be like, God, this is just big ominous thing. This has got to be for the big guys, right? I mean, the big guys have the money and all of that. This is expensive and complicated, and I'm barely making payroll. So like, if I live in a house and the roof is in disrepair and it's leaking, and I have to make a choice of repair the roof or feed my family, I know which way I'm going. And
Right.
these small businesses are like, I'm barely making payroll, right? So these are just unfortunate feelings that come up, and I think we'll dive into things, because Wendy, had that update to this process, and what are some practical things people can do so they don't live in this sort of terrible anxiety.
Yeah, or fear, right? We've seen it where the small business has been hit and they don't know how to clean everything up, and so we're usually walking in behind, like I said, these people below the poverty line, and they've been hit. And so, what do you do next? Oh no, I'm gonna turn everything off, and we see that a lot. They just turn everything off, and then they start from scratch and start all
Right.
over again. And I think that in the very small businesses, that's something you can do, and it does help. But in some of these businesses that have made that move, right? So I've started my business. I've actually been through my first 3 years. I now have historical data. I now have a larger client list. I can't just get rid of everything because they know how to get hold of me through this.
Mhm.
Um, so when this bad event happens, someone needs to understand what to do to bring them back to that spot, and they just can't get rid of everything and start over. So
Yeah.
that fear is real. I agree, and you're right, especially when you're trying to make those leaps between the different levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on that note, like, is it possible um, for a business to spend a lot of money on cybersecurity, but still be below the poverty line?
I think absolutely you can. I think that you can buy the latest and greatest. I go to a SIM and an XDR, but I don't have. I'm going to throw out acronym. Sorry, Scott. Extended detection response and a SIM, System Information Event Management System. They go to these big ends that when we set up cybersecurity, we set up defense in layers. We have a firewall, we have a SIM, we have an MDR, we have an XDR, we have all these different pieces that fit under each other so that if one not necessarily fails but misses something, something else picks it up. And so we walk it through. And I think I've seen where they start at the upper level without that base. Once again, if you're not doing patch management, you have vulnerabilities, you have 0 days, you have all these things that are going on, so you can skip pieces of the base to make it just that poverty line and sit at that poverty line, and you can go right past it and spend all this money and still miss those pieces.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like when you said, it's layers, right? And I was thinking to myself, as a private pilot, airplanes have redundancies, right? And so I kind of view what you're saying with regards to, layers, which we absolutely need, but you also have redundancies. Like you said,
Right.
if one doesn't pick it up, the other one will. And then, if you're doing application whitelisting, I mean, that's pretty hardcore, right? It's like stops things, right? And if
Right.
all else fails, your fail safe, your parachute is what? Your backups, right? So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
think of it like, yeah, and I think of it the same way at my house, right? So I usually enter my house through the garage door. So I've got a really big screen steel front door, and then I have a front door. So I have two doors. But once again, in layers, I don't just have a wooden door. I have a steel door in front of it that's harder to break through. And so if they break through that, now they still have to get through that old wooden door. So I might have time to set up something else behind that, but it's the same going in the garage door. If they get through my garage door, they still have to get into the house through another door that's locked.
Right.
So we talk, like you were saying earlier, we talk about making sure that our house is secure. And it's the same thing. We do it in layers and we don't realize it. Or, the old feudal system of a castle.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you just mentioned a bunch of things there, which brings this idea to me. Like, I was thinking 10, maybe 15 years ago, what we were protecting was, the inner infrastructure, right? And the outer perimeter really wasn't as big of a deal today. Is complexity playing a role in getting above and below this poverty line?
I don't think so, honestly. The poverty line is the poverty line. It's the poverty line for a reason. It's the
Mhm.
basics. It's not complex. We go back
Mhm.
to what I was saying. It's all bits and bytes still. Do you have vulnerability management in place where you're looking at those patching and you have something that you're automatically, even just using, if you're using Microsoft, making sure it's patched every time. And if a patch is missed, you have to go back and make sure why it was missed. So sitting at that basic level, patching, that's on all your applications, on your systems, on your hardware, everything. That's
Mhm.
at the basics. Then when we start talking endpoint detection and response, everybody knows all the different ones out there. There's major ones that you can go purchase right off the web every day. And then there's the ones that are the managed detection and response that has that people behind it and making
Mhm.
sure that everything's being looked at. So I don't think there's a lot of complexity there. I think that it goes back to understanding what the basics are and having someone who understands it, talent. And you don't have to, at the poverty line, if you're just getting there, putting it in place is what helps. And then you can start learning about it, or once again, have someone who understands it already to let you know how it works and managing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, you gave some advice that right there that we should really capture. And so complexity isn't a reason per se to make it more difficult, and take some steps. And so you're like back to the basics.
Yeah.
Let's be proactive, right? Not reactive. Things like that, right? And
Yeah, and I think
so,
that's a big one right there. The difference between below the poverty line and above the poverty line, reactive is going to be below, proactive is going to be above. If
yeah.
you're always reactive, you're not at that poverty line yet. If all you're ever doing is fighting those fires, you're having issues because you're sitting below that poverty line, and that could be a talent poverty line. So you get the tools in place, but you're still reacting all the time.
Right. Yeah, and like if I could help any of the business owners out there from my perspective, I would be like, stop viewing this as, I know it's important, but, right? It's like that has to get out of your head, like, if a doctor like lets you know that your cholesterol is high, I know it's important, but I'm having a nice steak tonight. Like it's like you've got to do more than that. And at a business level, they're just basic things. You already mentioned them. There's basic things that a business owner can implement. Just do these few things. Implement endpoint detection and response, right? You said
Yep.
that. Make sure you have like backup of all your critical systems, and just make sure that the backup's immutable, which means that it can't be overwritten, and then that you have one that's gapped, so when you're done with the backup, it can't. That's your final parachute, right? And then the most basic thing in my world is MFA. I don't know how many people I talk to that still don't have MFA.
Yeah.
multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, right? You need a second validation of who you are. So, like, if you just did those things, you'd be so much better off.
Oh, and I agree. We actually had a conversation a couple of days ago, a security conversation, and one of the things that there was a CEO asked was, "Why is it important to check the dark web? Is it important?" And we kind of looked at him and went, "Well, yes, because of the way threat actors do what they do. You want to know if they have your email address. You want to know if they have your password, how they handle those passwords, right? Credential stuffing. A little bit above the poverty line on that. But once again, it's just those things that I don't know what I don't know. Running something, there's going to be something wrong that happens.
100%. And like, I have this, presumption that, all my data is out there already. Like, I just assume everything about me is out there. And so I just don't want to make it any easier for
Right.
the threat actors. So, like, on a personal basis, I like to recommend things like, always, like, Apple does a great job. But most of the top companies do it now, but it's they allow you to create a unique email address. So easy now. It's called Hide My Email, and you hit a button, it gives you this email address. It goes to your normal email, so you're not really
Mhm.
setting up multiple emails. And so you set up a unique email address, a unique complex password for every site, and then activate MFA. Is that perfect? No, because it doesn't exist on here. But can you put your head down at night if you do those three things, feeling a lot better about your personal information? I think so.
Yeah.
And I can tell you it works, because if I start getting a bunch of junk email all of a sudden, I see where they're sending it. I know exactly who sold that data,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
can shut it off like that, and then
One of
goes
one of
forward.
the things that you just said that was really important is those backups, right? Making
Okay.
sure that you have your critical systems covered, and then sitting at that poverty line still. What I love is when you're talking about the emails, and most of your password managers today will do that for you. They'll do your emails, they'll do your credit cards, and they'll do your phone numbers. So when we start talking personal identity, that's the poverty line for personal identity, right? Being able to make sure that we stay safe with our own personal information, and as long as they can't get your email, they can't get you.
Yeah, and what's the three things they need to break into anything, right? It's your username, it's your password, and possibly your MFA if you have that activated, right?
Yeah,
They're in then, right? So why are you making their job any easier and using the same email address for every site you log onto? That's one third the battle.
right.
Right. So anyway, all right. So enough on that, because I can go crazy on this because I believe in it so strong. But anyway, so, like, look, there's talk about, like, should this be democratized? This concept of cybersecurity. What do you think, like, the industry would look like if we tried to treat cybersecurity, as a shared responsibility, like public health?
All
Like,
right.
would that be a way to help
Um,
everybody, in this area?
I think there's 2 ways to look at this, and I'll do the same thing. Look at our healthcare system, look at all these big when you start going big, there's a whole new issue that you're gonna run into, and that's the, being having things done by committee. We all know that it's a little bit harder to get something done quickly if it's gonna be done by committee because everybody has an opinion. I think it's a good way to get the word out to make sure that everybody understands that we should. I mean, NIST, National Institute, Standard Technology, it's a national thing. When we start talking FISMA and FedRAMP and all these different ways they do it, I think it's a great idea to set up that framework, but to actually sit there and say, this is how you have to do it, I think that's when we start getting into a little bit of trouble. And when you start getting into these big government ways of looking at how to do something, I don't think that's the best way in the world to get something done. That's me personally. But there's nothing wrong with the oversight of it or having that framework put in place for it. But for when we start talking about the poverty line, I don't know that that's the way that we need to do that. I think that it's personal responsibility as a business owner to be able to get in there and go, this is my business. I'm going to protect my business. It's also my choice not to protect my business. And that's putting your head in the sand and not paying attention to what's going around you and just, praying for luck.
Yeah, and if you think about the healthcare system, it's almost the same way. Because just because the doctor says, start taking this medication, it will help you. If you choose not to take it, you choose not to take it. It's not really
Correct.
like so. It's back to personal responsibility. I think the government definitely has a role here, like you said earlier, with certain things that people need to get done. Like I know NIST is not a regulatory one, but there are ones that are right, like the
Right.
California and New York have their own requirements and things like that for businesses, and that's fine. They can have those requirements, and a business can choose to follow them for compliance or not.
Well, think of PCI, once again, private industry who is going around and they are actually regulating that if you
Mm.
are hit, they're not reactive in the fact of they're there, or they're not proactive, that they're there making sure that you're doing it, but they're reactive. Boy, if you did something wrong after getting hit with PCI, they will let you know very fast and start fining you very quickly.
Absolutely. All right, now for a little fun conversation here. So I know you're a Harry Potter fan. So if you could whip out your magic wand and you could make a spell to erase any one barrier or barriers, whatever, which is keeping companies from getting at or above, the poverty line. What would you do with your wand there?
I think it would probably be the education portion of it, and that people just go and learn about it, because if you can learn about it, ignorance is the opposite of ignorance is education. If you know what you're doing, you're better able to protect yourself. You're better able to understand why you're protecting yourself. And I think for me, the lack of interest, maybe, I don't know where that that pivotal point is where we sit there. Maybe we have to give fear to somebody to make them move past it so that they learn about it to make sure that they're not going to be below that poverty line.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, most SMBs don't have the resource. Just like most homeowners don't necessarily know how to repair a hole in their wall or redo some, rewire their electrical outlet or something, and they have to hire, electrician or a plumber or whatever it is, and you can get ripped off from that. I think people put things off because they don't trust people to help them, or if they're going to be getting ripped off. So I think if I could wave my wand, it would be like, well, just go do your research like you would for hiring a plumber. Like, talk to people that look at the reviews, interview different companies, but it doesn't have to be complex. Like you said earlier, it has nothing to do with complexity. It has to do with the right people, with the right strategy. And from my perspective, if I could also get something done for these people, it would be like if you at least had if you had a preparation for recovery, because the odds of all of us, all of even one, all of us getting having an event, whether it's a breach or just an email, a business email compromise, whatever it is, whatever type of event is, the odds are very high
they
that
are.
work, right? And so it's really important that you have some idea how would you recover from that.
I think that's good. I like that. I was also thinking, I go back to my education. For the If you understand how electrical works in a house, it's really easy to rewire. It's easy to replace it. All these, I do it. So it's education and getting rid of that. But I agree with you as well. Make sure everybody has that backup in place, because boy, does that help when something does go down.
Yeah.
If, understanding, repair time, um, how long it takes you to do that restore, how much data you might lose. It's important because a lot of people don't realize that sometimes it takes more than an hour to restore a system.
Absolutely. And again, doesn't have to be super complicated. The technologies have improved a lot. So just get some help on it. And, that's that. So I think, we talked a lot about like the negative, what does it look like to be below and, blah, 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 just ending up on a little bit of a upbeat note, what would you, let's talk about a business above the poverty line, and, what would that look and feel like, and why does that matter?
Oh, I mean, I love being above the poverty line. Let's be honest. When something does happen, we have incident response plans in place. We know what to do when there's a business email compromise, if someone accidentally clicks on something, a backup isn't done correctly, and we fix it really fast. We see those vulnerabilities happening daily, or those 0 days that we're able to patch right away or not patch right away, depending on what the patch does. And then having that layered defense, knowing that even though there is a vulnerability out there for a 0 day, with 0 day meaning that it just came out and it's being actively exploited, I have all these different layers in place so I don't have to rush. And I'm being proactive so I already understand everything. It's not a reactive environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like, I would just say, you probably will never feel like you're safe enough, right? Like, like and it's kind of a healthy thing. Like, when I was younger, I used to ride motorcycles a lot, and I was told by somebody very passionately and said, if you ever feel comfortable on your motorcycle, that should be your day where you stop. Like,
Mhm.
a motorcycle rider has to be on the defense at all times, has to make sure that they're, not going to get hit by a car, all of that. So in my opinion, definitely living above the line will let you sleep better, knowing that when that day arrives, it's not going to be a bet your business proposition, right? If you were hoping you'd be up in 2 days and it takes a whole week, a business can survive that,
A
right?
business can, yeah.
A business can
If
survive.
you're being proactive and you're not being reactive. I agree with that.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is just to switch it from reactive to, proactive. Just do the basics like we listed earlier, and do one a quarter even, just
Mhm.
get something done like just set a goal once every 3 months to implement a little bit more, and over the course of 1 or 2 years, boy, you'll be above the poverty line, like way above the
And
poverty.
you never wanna create an instant response plan while you're handling an incident.
Yeah, that's probably good advice. All right, man. I think that's all the time we've got today. I think this was great, Tim. Thanks for spending some time with us. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Always a pleasure to be here,
Uh,
Scott.
so here's the truth: cybersecurity isn't just about how much you spend, it's about what you prioritize, how you lead, and who you trust to guide you. You might not control your budget, but you do control what you prioritize, how you learn, and who you lean on, right? So let me ask you, are you above the line, or just hoping you don't get hit first? All right, we'll see you next time with more real talk about risk, resilience, and leading in the age of cyber threats. Until next time, stay safe and informed.